welcome everyone to episode 15 of the Average Ontario Anglers podcast. I'll be your host this week and Jesse's co-host. And Jesse will be in charge of our interesting fishing facts. We'll make sure that it is interesting. If not, I'll personally slap him for you.
That's illegal.
Our main topic we're going to be talking about is top bass lures. It's going to be kind of a bit of a general topic, but we're going to narrow it down to some of our favorites and kind of share with you a bit of what online kind of told me what the top bass lures were. And we'll tell you if we agree with that or not, because a lot of those accounts are from the States and we don't live there.
Yep.
We also have a awesome sponsor this week. It's from True North Baits.
North Baits.
Yeah, so he's got some I use them. We use them for crappie actually this spring. They had some really good baits there. So we're going to be looking at a little bit of what he's going to be giving away to one fortunate winner. So to get us started at this week, though, Jesse is going to hit us off with an interesting fishing fact. And I'm trying to read his chicken scratch title over there, and I can't.
All right, this is... Last week, Andrew's was more entertaining about the bass cheaters. This is more educational. So it shouldn't get too low of a score. So I tried to think of something that I personally didn't know. I was like, okay, like what is something that, you know, you use all the time, but you may not understand exactly how it works or why it works. So I was thinking, I was like, what are polarized sunglasses? Like, what are they? Okay. Interesting, right? So like you may have, you know, used regular sunglasses that you bought that aren't polarized and tried to look into the water and you're like, these are crap. And then you put on a pair of polarized sunglasses and you can literally see through the water and you're like, what kind of voodoo is this? Like what, why does it work? Okay. So I didn't know. I just always took it for granted. So I did some research. This is not a very long, interesting fishing fact, but it's short but sweet. So polarized glasses reduce light glare. Now you may say, obviously, that's why they work. And they will 100% improve your fishing game, 100%. So here's what happened. Back in 1936, some old guy named Edwin H. Land, who worked for Polaroid, he created the first polarized glasses, and they have been a staple in the eyewear industry ever since. Now this is interesting because I remember when I grew up fishing, polarized sunglasses, they're kind of hard to get. Like you could get even the cheap bulky Rapala ones for like $30-$40.
You could only get ones that fit over other glasses.
Yeah. Now you go to the store and they're reasonably priced. You can get cheap ones, you can get expensive ones, but like they're everywhere.
And you look at even the name brands, like you look at Oakley or Ray-Ban, you're getting a pair of sunglasses, regular sunglasses from them. Generally they are polarized as well.
Yeah.
Like it's become standardized almost.
Exactly. So like it is good that you can get, you know, if you're getting into fishing and you're like, wow, these benefits sound good, you can probably spend $20 or $30 and get a pair to get you started. But anyway,
I still buy those.
Yeah, I buy those too because I break mine all the time.
Scratch them up.
Yeah. So anyway, that started in 1936. And polarized lenses, this is how they work. This is interesting. It has a special chemical that is applied to the lens that filters the light. Now it's like, okay, that's interesting. Obviously it filters the light somehow, but it's a chemical. What does this chemical do? Well, when light scatters as it bounces off a surface, it creates a glare. And I actually looked up the definition of glare and it said, a strong dazzling light. Kind of like a disco ball. But the chemicals, what happens is the chemicals molecules, they line up specifically to block some of the light passing through the lenses. Now, not
so there's only certain directions then,
yes,
essentially.
Exactly. So on polarized lenses, the filter created by this chemical, it creates vertical openings of light. Now, how the heck they do that, I have no idea. But it creates vertical openings of light and blocks horizontal light waves bouncing off smooth surfaces of water.
That makes sense as to why, because I wondered why when I wear them, especially
when you turn your head.
Yeah, you turn your head and you're seeing like the weird like stripes or dots on windshields disappear and come back.
Yeah, right?
All right.
So isn't that
we look
interesting?
like absolute idiots? Like
I'm going to repeat that for emphasis. The filter created by this chemical creates vertical openings of light that blocks horizontal light waves. That's very interesting. So as a result, you can see clear and deeper into the water that actually has glare on it, because they use the example of a blind. Say it's bright outside. You pull the blind down, and it blocks some of the light from coming in. It won't block all of it, but it blocks some of it. But this chemical creates, it only allows certain light in at certain directions, which is very interesting. So when you're wearing sunglasses, you may have noticed this. You may have noticed that when you're wearing polarized sunglasses, you may have trouble seeing LCD screens, cell phones, watch screens, ATM displays, stuff like that. And I've noticed that too. Like sometimes I'll be wearing my polarizers and I'm trying to take a picture of my phone, and you have to take your sunglasses
especially
off.
If you're trying to take a horsontal photo on your phone and it doesn't work. Yeah.
So definitely, if you have that, don't worry. Nothing's wrong with your sunglasses. That's the way it works.
Squidward, I've gone blind.
So the advantages far outweigh the disadvantages, though. You're like, oh man, I can't believe I can see all these fish, but I can't see my my watch screen. Like, who cares, guys?
Doesn't matter what time it is. Keep casting.
Exactly. So it definitely outweighs all the disadvantages, though. And again, there's less strain on your eyes. So especially, you should always be wearing sunglasses when you're out on the water when it's sunny. But when you have polarized glasses, it not only helps your eye strain, but it helps you actually see into the water. And now if you fish shallow water structure, that can be a big deal, or trout creeks. And a quick example of this is, I remember when I was young, I was like 13, 14, I bought a pair of polarized sunglasses. Remember those
the
big
old Berkeley ones? Oh, the Rapala.
Remember?
Yeah.
They look terrible. Now they're a lot more stylish, but they look terrible. And my dad took me to this trout stream that we used to fish a lot, and he was like fishing this pool, and I looked at the pool and I was like, there's no fish here. And he's like, oh yeah, they're in there, yeah. And I'm like, put these sunglasses on. He looks and he sees straight to the bottom. There's no fish. And he's like, wow, these are amazing. So it's definitely something that you need. So that is the very brief and interesting interesting fishing fact. So what do you think about that?
I like it. It was good. It was good. It was informative, interesting.
Okay.
And it put me, I felt like I was back in school. I admit at the beginning I was a little like, this is gonna be boring.
Bill Nye the Science Guy.
It wasn't and in the end it turned into like that class. It'd be like, yeah, science rules. Yeah, I would say I'll give you a letter rating.
Okay.
And I will actually give a letter rating this time, not numbers again, because I know things, English language.
No, you don't.
What gave it away? So I would say that's an A-. That was good. That was
better than I thought. I was literally just hoping to get a D+.
You know that I like the weird and interesting. I like learning.
Yep.
I watch documentaries for fun. I'm that weird.
He's a weirdo.
Anyways, thank you very much for the interesting fishing
No
fact.
problem.
So next up, we're going to be talking about top bass lures. So we're not going to mention every single lure that's out there. We're going to be a little generic about our descriptions. We're not going to be mentioning, we're not going to be trying to mention certain brands or certain, exact differences. But some of the baits that came to my mind, I just wrote down like a list of stuff that I have when I go bass fishing, stuff I bring in my tackle box. We have Senkos or stick baits, classic topwaters like the jitterbug or a walking bait or a crawler, frogs or other soft plastic topwaters, chatterbaits, spinner baits, tube jigs, plastic worms, flipping jigs, crankbaits, Texas rigged worms, flukes, swim baits / swim jigs, jerk baits, Ned rig, drop shot. Like these are all things that I have been successful bass fishing, and I know you have as well.
That's a lot of stuff, man.
It's tons.
Yeah.
So that's not the list of top baits because that's way too much to cover.
Yeah.
So I was looking online to see what online in general had as the top 5. Generally it's top 10 list. I decided that's too much to cover.
Yeah.
So I started looking at the top 5 of those top 10 lists to see what would pop up. It was Senkos, chatterbaits, plastic worms, it's like Texas rigged, flipping jigs, and crankbaits.
Yeah.
Like there again,
that's
solid
a good list.
A good list. What's one thing on there that now I asked Jesse to give me 5 things that he would always like, that his top 5 bass baits, and I wrote down my top 5 bass baits out of this same list. And what was on there on the online list that we chose that online did not have? Like think of bass fishing. What's the first bait you think of?
A frog?
Frogs.
Yeah.
Why was frogs not on the top 5 list of the online thing?
I don't know.
That doesn't. Anyways, that kind of irked me a bit. But anyways, so this is why we're not going to follow the online list. We're going to talk about our own list.
Because online is dumb. Unless you're listening to this online, then thank you.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. So, for anyone who's interested to know what Jesse's and I's picks are for this, Jesse's top picks were Senkos, stick baits. Lame. I'm just kidding.
Oh,
they're
work.
effective.
They're boring, but they work.
Frogs, chatterbaits, Ned rigs, or a drop shot, and drop shots. That's his 5 picks there.
Well, I added that because I'm talking largemouth and smallmouth here.
Yeah.
So
like bass in general.
Yeah.
Right. So same thing. I try to do the same with mine. My top choices were classic topwaters. Just I really like fishing those. I'm not going to say they're the most productive, but I love fishing the classic topwaters, like hard baits. Frogs are on there. Chatterbaits, just like Jesse, those two. And then I also have flipping jigs or Texas rig plastics and flukes.
Yeah.
I love fishing like a soft plastic fluke for bass.
I'll tell you though, that list you asked me, I would totally redo it now, but like 100% add a Texas rig in there for me. You need that 100%.
Yeah. So what we're going to do is we're now going to kind of pick apart our list of what we liked because it's a lot less topics to cover.
Yeah.
So we're going to look at a few of these and look at what, when we like to use this certain bait or presentation, how we fish it, for what, and kind of where. So for example, the first one, we'll get it over with because I'm sure everyone has heard of Senkos or stick baits. Every soft plastic manufacturer out there has one, and that's because they work.
They flat out catch fish.
If you're having, there's so many memes out there online of like, oh, I can't catch any fish today. It's like, you see the guy pull out a Senko. Like, this is what you do.
Yeah.
So when do you bring out a Senko? I have this Senko.
I'm a bit of a snob, and I don't like using Senkos unless I have to. That may sound snobby, but like they work. But when you're at the point when you're trying to challenge yourself as an angler, chucking out a Senko may be boring. But when the bite's tough, they work. 'Cause for me, they work for some reason that I can't explain. When the bite is tough or you're on pressure water, they will almost always hit a Senko or a stick bait.
And generally in the boat, we have it tied on the extra rod. Or one of the extra rods as a follow-up bait for
throwback,
the 1-2 punch, right? So we're fishing the frog or we're flipping in whatever, and you get a blow up, you get a strike, but you miss the fish. You're not going to hit that. They stop hitting that bait. They don't want to hit it again.
Yeah, you whip out a wacky worm and whew.
Yeah. So they definitely have a place on the boat still, even if you are, if you don't like it because, oh, it's the stupid bait. Yeah, it is. It's stupid because it works.
But it's one of those baits that you can literally fish so many ways. You can Nico rig it. You can Texas rig it.
Yeah.
You can fish it on a drop shot.
Half, Ned rig it.
Yeah, like they just work. They're great baits, and like Andrew said, every tackle shop you go into will have probably a massive selection of different sizes and colors that you can use.
So what would be how would you generally rig it, and where would you fish a Senko? When you do break it out, what's the scenario?
Wacky rig is probably the most popular way. I'm not a big wacky rig guy. I like to Texas rig my Senko. I like using like a 3 or 4/0 worm hook, like Texas rig hook.
Mm-hmm.
I may fish it weightless. I may fish it on a very small, like 1/8 ounce tungsten weight just to get it down. Usually weightless though, because they have a lot of salt in them, so they actually cast pretty good. It's one of those baits you can cast anywhere, around lily pads, around docks. They're really good to skip under docks if you're practicing skipping. A Senko is a good bait because it actually has enough weight and surface area that it skips pretty good. I really like it around timber, like if I see like a lay down, something like that, like wood, docks, lily pads, anywhere. I'm not going to be fishing them in deeper water though, because they take so long to sink. Not a fan of that.
Yeah, so shallow water. I really like Texas rigging them as well if I'm around timber, but wacky rig is still my primary go-to for them.
It has such a good action. It's hard not to.
Yeah. And again, it's great. I often don't use it as my go-to bait. It's the follow-up bait of, I know there's a fish there, he hit, I just want to make sure I get him. So that's, always leave if you're bass fishing, bring it. They work for smallmouth and largemouth, like
smallmouth
100%.
love them, yeah.
Yep. Even fishing dead timber, like an old tree falling in the water, and you're fishing like a jig, like a heavy like a flipping jig, and you get the strike, miss it, and you just flip in with a lighter action spinning rod, and it's just like quivering down at the end of the end of the branches, and you'll get that fish, almost like 100%.
And if you do want to wacky rig it, you can buy weedless wacky rig hooks with the little weed guard, the fiber weed guard, and they work great too.
Yeah. And I'm the same way. I don't like the weight with it. I want it to have that slow fall. I think that's the whole point of it.
Yep.
Right, so next one is classic topwaters.
Yeah.
So again, we talked a bit.
So many.
So I really like again, the jitterbug is probably one of the most classic topwater.
It is.
Crazy crawler is another one. They have
the popper.
They're coming back into fashion, the crawling baits. I don't use them too much because as soon as like one little weed or one leaf on the surface of the water hits that one arm, it just stops crawling.
Yeah.
Depending on the one that you get. Some have
They're
like
finicky.
stiff arms as well, but yeah, it can foul up a lot easier, I find, with the crawling bait, so I don't often use those. A number of years ago, Jesse got me started. He's like, we need to learn how to walk the dog. We've been fishing for years, and we had never actually, like, we had some hard bait, like walking baits,
like a Zara
but
spook.
didn't know how to use them.
Yeah.
And so he's like, all right, I'm just gonna do it. And he's like, he calls me after a bass trip. He's like, hey, walking the dog's super easy.
Yeah.
We've been doing, like, it's so easy to learn. I learned it in an afternoon, and I nailed a bunch of fish coming up 30 feet to nail this walking bait.
Walking baits are fantastic once you learn how to use them, and it's not hard. It's easy, and walking baits generally, if I had to have two topwaters, I'd probably pick a walking bait and a popper. And a walking bait for me is covering water.
Yeah.
I'm not chucking, this is generalized, you can do this, but I'm not chucking a walking bait like beside a log or beside a dock.
Yeah.
I'm going to cast it as far as I can and just bop, 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 walk it along the shoreline or along a certain area.
Yeah.
A popper is target oriented. I'm like, there's a dock, there's a stump, there's a lily pad. I'm going to chuck a popper there because it's smaller, it works better in one area, and it's a more subtle bait. But walking baits, like a Zara spook, there's so many, but the Zara spook is probably the most common one. They're fantastic, and smallmouth
And
love
again,
them.
talking about classic topwaters, Zara spook is about as classic as you get. Another one too is I have recently acquired, and I've used it a bit. I absolutely love it. It's the Hedden. It's not the Zara spook. It's the Wounded Minnow, and it's like a small Zara spook or smaller. It's got two treble hooks on it, and it has a prop on the front and back. So it's a topwater prop bait.
Yeah.
So you don't walk the dog with it. You just drag it forward, and it spins these propellers, and then like stops, and it splashes a lot. So it doesn't have that big like pop, like it's just like spinning on the top of the water. And
you probably won't be able to find one of those at the store, but if you can't, the Hedden Torpedo is another one. A classic one is the Devil's Horse. But if you can't find one of those, one of my favorite ones, and you know I've caught two of the biggest bass at the Algonquin trips recently, has been the X-Wrap prop.
Yep.
Which is a thin minnow bait with 3 treble hooks and has a prop on the front, prop on the back, and it's a subtle bait. Again, like you said, you cast it out, you let it sit, and then you just pull it, and it's like...
Yeah. I love that for when it's dead calm. Like glass water. Yeah. A walking bait is great with it's like there's a slight ripple on the waves, not chop, just like a slight ripple from like the lightest breeze.
Yeah.
I love walking baits in that. But yeah, the prop bait and
it's subtle. And it's had one thing. I think one mistake that I made when I was younger, and a lot of anglers I see make, is they'll see a day or a morning and it's flat calm, and they're like, oh, and they put on the most obnoxious noisy topwater, like a big buzz bait or a big like something just crazy, and it's like, no, that's the time to put on something a little more subtle. It actually works a lot better, especially if you're fishing in shallow water
or smaller. If it has a lot of action, like if you're using a walking bait, throw on like the
smaller one, the Zara puppy.
The Zara puppy. So or the Hedden Spook Junior or something like that, like those, just the smaller ones, and they still have like your action if you want to give it that much action. But again, smaller bait, a bit more finesse presentation. And the one last thing I'll say about it is I love my best way to fish these is it's called dead sticking. And so I'll cast out and I'll just let the bait sit there for about sometimes like 3 seconds, like a count of 3 to 5 seconds on the initial cast. And then I'll start like, I'll walk the dog or I'll reel it in, a jitterbug, whatever, for about 4 to 6 feet. And then I'll stop and I'll just let it sit for a count, like 3, sometimes to 10 seconds. On the second pause, I'll also sometimes wait longer. And I fish a lot of my topwaters this way. And it's just called dead sticking. And like Jesse and I fish very differently. So we were at Algonquin Park camping a while ago, and he was fishing a prop bait, having really good success with it, and he was kind of not really power fishing up. It was a constant retrieve with it, though.
Yeah, I was like, pull, pause, but it wasn't very long pauses. Yeah.
And so he's having good success with that. And I was using a bit more of I was using a Zara Spook, larger, more aggressive topwater, but I was having really long pauses. And you'd be surprised how long it is, and you'll see a bass just staring at your bait.
Yeah.
And you just don't move it. And literally 5 seconds will go by, and all of a sudden it's like, boom, and he hits it.
Yeah.
I love that stuff. So
it's
again,
crazy.
Especially dead sticking, but classic topwaters is, for me, it's such an awesome like style of fishing.
And you can't not mention in top lures like a whopper, plopper, or a chopper.
100%. Yeah.
Especially if you're buying your first topwater lure for bass or pike or anything.
Yeah.
Get yourself a Berkeley Chopo or a Whopper Plopper. Just cast out, reeled in. You can dead stick it too. They're great. They're plop, 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 plop.
Yep.
You know, they're just
same
fantastic
thing. Jitterbugs,
baits.
same thing. You can cast out, retrieve those as well.
Yeah.
And you don't have to essentially learn a whole new technique for those.
It's just cast and wind. That's it.
All right. So I spent enough time on the thing that I really liked. So we'll carry on to frogs. So Jesse and I both had this on our list as something that we'd always go bass fishing with, especially largemouth, is frogs. So what do you think makes frogs so effective?
The fact that you can cast them wherever the heck you want and they come back without any weeds on them. It's a shallow water hammer.
Yep.
Yeah.
I fish frogs a lot around shoreline. So even if there's no lily pads, stuff like that on the surface of the water, and I'm trying to, cast a bait right into shore under a bunch of like low hanging cedar trees, I'll often use a frog or some other completely like weedless bait, because how many times I mess up my cast, flies right into the branches, but I can just slowly reel it in and it falls out of the tree.
It's
treeless.
Fish it. Yeah.
So I really like it for even that. But yeah, 100%.
It's a forgiving bait.
Yes.
Yeah, you can cast it, and like you said, you may be super good at casting, but for generally most of us,
for the average angler, it's a challenge.
Some of your casts are going to be crappy, and you're going to hit, on top of a dock, maybe on a boat, in some trees, and your frog will come back usually unscathed.
Another thing with the frog fishing is when you're fishing it in this shallow water and shallow cover, the other great thing about it is the strike. Anything top water, the blow up is like, even if you miss the fish, it was a great blow up. Your chest is pounding, like you'll maybe kicking yourself for premature ejaculating, as Jesse calls it, like yanking the milk out of the fish's mouth. Yeah, but like seeing those blow ups, and especially too. Even fishing any topwater, when pike start hitting that stuff and they rocket themselves like 3 feet out of the water.
Pike and muskie do that. I've hooked so many muskie,
and you'll see that when you're bass fishing, because you don't primarily use them for pike and muskie. Generally speaking, you're fishing frogs or bass, and all of a sudden this snot rocket fires 3 feet out of the air, like a torpedo.
Yeah, I actually was a quick story about that. I was fishing with my nephew 1 or 2 years ago, and I was frog fishing in just a dense lily pad field, and I cast kind of like right in front of him. He was in front of the canoe. I was reeling in, and I had just this wake come towards my frog, and I was like, oh, muskie. Next cast, I cast out again. This wake comes up. It grabbed the frog and cartwheeled like 3 feet out of the air, did a flip right in front of my nephew in the canoe, and then smacked in the water and bit me off. And he was like, what the heck was that, an alligator? I was like, yeah, pretty much. But we actually have a full episode coming up all about frog fishing,
so we're not going to spend too much time on frogs. We're going to get into a lot more techniques and particulars on it.
But I always have a frog, like the way where we fish a lot in the Kawarthas, there's a lot of weeds and shallow vegetation, so I always have a frog tied on.
And again, the topwater strike, we always say I'd rather catch 1 fish on a frog
than 10 on a Senko. I always say that. And again, you may be from Northern Ontario or another place where maybe there's not a lot of vegetation. Yeah. Like Andrew said, you can cast them just as a regular topwater. Maybe not the best, but it is what it is. It's going to depend what lake you fish.
Frogs exist even like in the northern lakes where there's no topwater weeds. So that's why I say if fish it where frogs are going to be. If there's like a big rock pile or stuff like that, and you hear a bunch of frogs at night there, try pitching a frog over there. Yeah, might be surprised you. Next up is chatterbaits and spinner. We'll talk about chatterbaits and spinnerbaits a bit. So we have another episode coming up soon about chatterbaits.
Isn't that next week?
No, I don't think it's next week.
It's
Maybe
coming
it is.
up.
I think it is, actually.
Next week is chatterbaits, so we're not going to get super in depth, but yeah, chatterbaits are legit.
I think next week is frog fishing.
Okay.
Anyways.
Either way, you're in for a very bassy month this month.
Yes. Well, that's because it's bass opener. Well, soon, around. I don't know when exactly this is released, but
Yeah, it'll be soon.
yeah. So chatterbaits and spinnerbaits, they fill a pretty similar niche, I would say.
Yeah, they're just, you use them in slightly different situations, but they're very similar.
Yeah.
They even look similar.
But you and I both said chatterbait instead of spinnerbait.
Yeah.
So why did you choose? I'll give my opinion after because I want to base mine off of what you say.
Well, honestly, when I was thinking of the list, I'm more of a largemouth fisherman.
Mm-hmm.
So I fish more shallow cover. If I was fishing more smallmouth, chatterbaits work great for smallmouth, but spinnerbaits are probably have the edge for me. I'd probably pick a spinnerbait over a chatterbait for smallmouth. But since I'm fishing a lot of shallow cover, chatterbaits are great because they're a really good reaction bait.
Mm-hmm.
Because spinnerbaits are more weedless than chatterbaits. Chatterbaits have an exposed hook. There's no arm protecting it. They do catch on weeds, but that's the whole point. If you're fishing around sparse weeds, I'm not saying cast into slop, but if you're fishing around sparse weeds, you kind of want your chatterbait to get stuck in the weeds, and then you rip your rod and cause your bait just to rip out of the weeds.
Yeah.
And it causes a reaction bite. And sometimes when the fish are just not in the mood to bite, that reaction bite, it's something they can't control. It's a reaction. It's like if someone tossed just like, here, catch, and they throw a ball at you. You just reactively grab it. Same thing happens with bass, and chatterbaits are just perfect for that.
Yeah. And the one thing I like about chatterbaits, so even for smallmouth personally, I like chatterbaits. I do use spinnerbaits as well. I'm not knocking them at all. They're a great bait. But the Mini Max chatterbait is just a little bit smaller, and it's like the perfect bite size for a smallmouth bass. I absolutely love those.
And largemouth too, but yeah, small, it's perfect for smallmouth.
Yeah. And pike will bite you off.
100%. But there's so many different types of chatterbaits and weights and blades and all that stuff. You can fish the whole water column from shallow to bouncing right on the bottom and deep water rocks. So like we're going to get more into that eventually in
100%.
a coming episode.
Now, one thing that didn't make our list, but I did want to give like kind of a special mention to, is tube jigs.
Yep.
They're on the rise again of being a bit more popular. We just picked some up actually from Water Wolf.
Bass Magnet.
Bass Magnet, yeah. Right. So Bass Magnet, we picked up some tube jigs. I'm excited to use those again because I want to fish them a bit differently than I used to. I used to fish them around rocks and stuff like that. Amazing smallmouth bait.
Yep.
Amazing. And I really want to fish it more like pitching. I want to try pitching them into pockets and stuff like that. Yeah. It's going to work.
Flipping tubes is used to be very popular.
Yeah.
A lot of people still do it, but it used to be like the deal. They had like flipping tubes and Texas rig tube. It has the reason why it's different than say flipping a beaver bait or something typical is because tubes have a very weird spiral fall.
Yeah.
It's so random, and things that are not random, like if things fall straight down, up and down like that, it's not very natural.
Yeah.
So if a fish sees
It's
some
a good
random
reaction
bait
bite,
that's just
but-
kind of like skittering down like a wounded fish, it's so natural to them.
Yes. So that is one thing that it didn't make any of the lists into the top 5. 100% though worth an honorable mention, and it is something that I want to put a bit more time towards and gain a bit more confidence in this year.
100%.
Next up would be flipping. So that would be like flipping jigs or like flipping some Texas rig plastics into the weeds.
Yeah.
For me, I have a lot more confidence in like flipping a Texas rig worm than a flipping jig. But that's just,
I think that's with a lot of people though.
my experience mainly.
Yeah, I've heard a lot of people and they're like, you know what, they say jigs are so popular and like, I don't really catch fish on jigs. There's a time and a place. Like we're like, what are the pros and cons of using a Texas rig, say like a Texas rig crawl bait or a flipping jig with a crawl bait on it? One is going to be slightly more weedless than the other. I don't care what jig guys say. A Texas rig is more streamlined and it'll slip through thicker weeds better, I find. I do find you get bigger bites on jigs because it's like we were saying in the swim jig episode 2 episodes back. It's more bulky. It's a bigger profile. I think it attracts bigger bites. I still catch dinks on them, believe me, but I do find that. So like, for instance, sometimes I'll go through like one of the main areas that I flip and I flip just a 1/2 ounce tungsten head, a craw bait with a 3 or 4 odd hook. And I just go down flipping through lily pads here, there, beside a dock. And then sometimes I'm like, oh, I'm going to try a jig. And every time I'm flipping jigs out, I'm pulling crap off, like weeds and crap off the eye of the jig and on the, in the weed guard, and it gets stuck on it. It's like, if there's a lot of like floating vegetation and weeds that are getting stuck on the jig, a Texas rig seems to pull through. So I kind of favor them.
100%.
Yeah.
And I know we've had so I wasn't very. I remember my first jig fish actually was you're fishing on one of in the Kawartha area, and I was telling Jesse I owned a couple jigs. I had never caught a fish on a flipping jig ever, and so I ended up. I'm like I'm gonna try this day. Jesse was killing it on him, and I just kept catching the frog because that's all I had confidence in. I did not have any confidence in the jigs, and I'd put it on for a while, cast. And Jesse would keep out fishing me, and I'd get upset.
It was one of those days though that they weren't committing to the frog, and I was like, Andrew, like put on a jig or put on something that's getting underneath, right?
Yeah.
So he finally did.
So I did. So I keep asking, and this is a question that I ask stupidly every single time I'm learning a new technique, pretty much, unless it's a topwater, is how do I know when I get a bite? And silly me, because the hardest bite you'll ever feel in your life
is a jig bite.
A jig bite.
Sometimes, yeah.
So it's funny because I'm expecting this big, like, and I have felt it since, and you feel a jig bite, and it just feels like a rock bit your jig. Like, what happened?
Yeah.
I feel like a snag, but it just happened like instantaneously.
Yeah.
So anyway, I cast out. There's an old dock and a big like old stump in this deep hole, weeds all around, and I was like, okay, that stump looks like it'll hold something.
Yeah.
So I flipped this jig in, and I let it sink, and I had slack line, and I look over at Jesse, and I wasn't really paying attention at all, and all of a sudden I look back. Like, why is my line 30 feet away from where I casted? And I just like reel in, I feel weight, set the hook, and I landed. It was like over a 3-pound bass.
It was a good bass.
My first jig fish was a good fish.
Yeah.
And what surprised me was, and I've noticed it since with jig fishing, how long
they hold it.
A fish will hold the bait.
They hold it.
Like, this thing swam, and I don't mean fast. I was not paying attention. I was just talking to Jesse, not at all really fishing my bait.
Yep.
I cast out, did nothing, and it picked it up and swam 30 feet casually without knowing it was a hook or a line attached to that thing.
Yep.
Swam 30 feet casually across, thankfully not into a stump. And I got it in. Like, that blows my mind still to this day, is how long they'll hold a jig. So 100%. I think that's a big reason why they're so effective.
Yeah, and we're going to get more into this in another episode, but one tip that I'd add on that is, some people will say like, oh, a bass grabs your jig, set the hook immediately. I want the fish to grab it and then get ready for the hook set. Like we said, oftentimes they hold it.
Yeah.
So get yourself situated for a good hook set. Don't just slackline them or just like have a weird hook set because you're trying to do it as quick as possible. That fish is holding on. It thinks that it has a good meal in its mouth. It's not going to let go of it. Yeah. Reel in till you feel the fish, and then just pull back.
It's going to feel the hook. It's going to feel like the heavy weight. Like, oh, they're hard. Guess what? Bass love crayfish.
Yeah.
Guess what they are? Hard.
Yeah. Now, that being said, sometimes in some lakes and sometimes of the year, a bass will suck in a jig and spit it out before you even feel it.
Yep.
But oftentimes when they're aggressively feeding, they'll hold it for quite a bit. And
I've
that
seen
goes
them do that
double
with crankbaits too, though. Like, it's for anything.
It goes double with soft plastics, I'd say, if you're fishing like a Texas rig.
Yeah.
But they're great. They're great to catch largemouth and smallmouth jigs and Texas rigs.
So the next one I'll talk about is flukes. So for me,
that's a good one.
A fluke is such an awesome bait. And I'm separating that from the swim baits or paddle tails and stuff like that. Just for me, I have tons of confidence in a Texas rigged weightless fluke. Or if I will, I'll put a little weighted like underspin fluke, but very limited weight, like an 1/8 of an ounce or at most quarter ounce if I'm fishing, from fairly deep water. Like down to 10, 15 feet. It's still not weighted very heavy, and I want to have that slow presentation. And the thing I love about the flukes is whether, again, I love the Z-Man, if I can get it, the Z-Man streaks. They used to have the old Z-Man fluke. Yeah. Back when it was called Cyberflex.
Yeah, the Zoo 2.
And it was laced with garlic, and I miss those tremendously. If anyone, I'm going to put this call out there. If you have an old bag of the old, was it Strike King?
Strike King Cyberflex, made by Z-Man.
Yes, yeah. Strike King Cyberflex, made by Z-Man, flukes with the garlic scent. Please mail them to me. I have been looking for those at CanCast, at random people's homes, and I'm doing plumbing. I've been looking for these again because I had a pack of 3, and they lasted me about 5 years. because I'd run each bait like a year and a half, 2 years, until it was literally unusable.
Just
And
like
I miss them.
Glued it together.
Yep. I miss
Andrew's
those
problem with asking you that is he's telling you how good the bait is, so just keep it for yourself and catch fish on it.
They stink.
They're the worst.
So one of the things I love doing with flukes is I really like them fishing on heavy cover. Yeah. So I'll Texas rig it weightless, and again, if it's Z-Man, I even use the razor shads with Z-Man too.
It floats.
And it floats. It supports even a 3/0 wide gap like offset hook. And so I'll cast that out, and I'll twitch the rod as I bring it in, just very slightly, almost like wiggling the rod tip. And as you just consistently reel, it just like twitches the bait through all the little stems of the weeds. It's like right underneath the lily pad tops, but through all the stems. And I absolutely love that. And I did really well when I went camping. Yeah,
I remember that day. He was killing me. I was fishing a frog, and that day was slick calm, and I was trying to kind of try to finesse the frog a bit, but he had this just floating, just twitching little plastic minnow just underneath the surface, and the bass were just coming up and they just slurp it off, and you wouldn't even see a splash, nothing, just like a little slurp, and then he'd be like, fish on, fish on.
Jesse's like, dang it, ow, I don't even see the strike. I'm like, it's because it's not there.
He's like, supernatural.
And another reason why I have a lot of confidence in the fluke is I caught my biggest largemouth bass on a fluke, which was over 4 pounds, and we were fishing again in Kawartha area, heavily pressured water on this
very
lake.
pressured lake in this small lake,
and we were fishing this like there's one single dock that came out in the middle of the water, like came out like 40 feet. It was ridiculous. And there's not much cover around. Like shouldn't say that, there's tons of cover around because it's Kawartha, there's weeds everywhere, but there's not much man-made. I'm looking for something different, so we're flipping docks primarily. And I was casting this fluke round, getting it as deep under the dock as I could. You can skip them really nicely too, which is why I like it. And it was very slow sinking. I had a
very slow.
Yeah, it was barely sub buoyant. And so I just twitch it in, and you can almost walk the dog with them underwater.
Oh, you can.
I love.
Yeah.
So this thing's twitching underwater back and forth, and you feel it. You feel just like a small tap. And they don't like annihilate this thing. They just like suck it in their mouth, like Jesse said, and that's it. And they hold it. And so I reel in the slack, get prepped for the hook set, hook on, and I dragged this bass out from this dock, and it was the biggest largemouth I've caught. It wasn't like 8 pounds.
No, it was. We didn't weigh it, but it was
approaching 5.
We did weigh it.
I think it was 4 something.
It was 4 something. It was a good for that particular lake.
Yeah,
it was fantastic. Some lakes, it's like, oh yeah, we catch 5s all the time, but some lakes, sometimes a 3-pounder is a giant. So when you catch a 4, it's like, whoa.
So that's for me. I have a lot of confidence in the flukes, and it's something that, again, I'll fish it in place of a weedless frog, or I'll fish it in place of like a Sanko or stuff like that. I'll fish it really finesse, or you can fish it fast. It's another versatile bait for me, floating, sinking, whatever.
Yeah, and you know who makes flukes? True North Baits.
True North Baits. Yeah. He has some actually really nice finesse ones too. So if you're fishing some light gear, and it's like it's exactly the size of like a 3 or 4 inch minnow, and you get a small finesse hook, and again, it's not going to float. It's going to sink slowly, not crazy fast, but again, you can cast right into weeds, just twitch it right through all the stems, and a bass sitting in the weeds is not going to pass up a nice little morsel of this like stupid little minnow swimming by its face. It's like, you idiot.
It's like a timbit.
I know, I eat those whenever I see them. And the last one we're going to talk about is the Ned rig.
Okay.
/ drop shot. They're both finesse based. So you choose which one you want to talk about. How about that?
I'll talk about the Ned rig. Why not?
All right.
I'm not okay. To start off, I'm not a Ned rig fan, but I cannot argue with the fact that they actually catch tons of fish. I'm not a Ned rig fan. It just seems dumb, but they slam fish.
So do Senkos. There you heard it. Just 2 baits that Jesse thinks are dumb made his top 5 list of most effective bass baits.
I didn't say Jesse's favorite baits to fish. This is the most effective baits. Yeah. But anyway, a Ned rig is a great bait. It's literally, think of it as a short, fat Senko. That's pretty much what it is. And it's
Senko cut in half.
Yeah. And you know what? When I first saw the Ned rig started becoming popular like over 10 years ago, I kind of looked at it and I was like, that's kind of dumb. Like, what does it do? It's just a jig. It's not at all. If you watch the guy who actually came out with the design for the Ned rig, explain how to fish them, it's totally different than I ever thought. Again, you can fish them any way you want. They'll catch fish. But what time when you're fishing like a Senko is the fish usually going to hit? It's as it's slowly falling, right? The same thing is with the Ned rig. I watched this guy cast it out, and they have such a small jig head on these baits, and the Z-Man turd,
the TRD,
the Ned, it slowly sinks down, and then the fish just comes up and slurps it up. And when it hits the bottom, if no fish has eaten it by then, he rips his rod up a bit, lets it go up, and then it sinks again. He recreates that slow sinking subtle action over and over again. I see a lot of people just fishing them on the bottom, like a jig, just hopping them on the bottom. Obviously that works too, but
or dragging them too.
Yeah, and there's tons of ways you can fish them, but the original way to fish them was actually a long fall. That's why they have such small,
aggressive like jig snap, and then
and they're great baits. And like again, they catch anything. They're great for smallmouth. They're great for largemouth.
And again, it's not
panfish.
It's not a big bait. This is a small finesse size.
They're less
bait.
than 3 inches. I think normally they're about 2 3/4 inches long. Yeah, and there's tons of great ones out there.
And they catch guys win tournaments on these things.
Oh yeah,
like
it's a great finesse bait.
Yep. So I think that covers pretty well of Jesse and I's opinions on some of the.
You didn't do drop
baits.
shot.
Okay, we can do drop shot.
Okay. Oh,
Let's do drop shot.
Drop shot's great.
Drop shot's fun. So what's the difference then between Ned rig is small. Yeah. Drop shot is also generally a finesse size bait as well.
Yeah. So
what is I'll explain kind of what a drop shot system looks like if you haven't heard of it. So I have a small weight, generally 1/4 ounce, sometimes less, sometimes more, but about 1/4 ounce I would say is normal, or
like an 1/8, 3/16. Sometimes in deeper water, heavier obviously.
Yeah. And then you have anywhere from like 6 inches to up to 2 feet, whatever you want. This allows you to, and then a hook. I should finish explaining the rig before I go into reasons. So you have a weight, you have a length of line. We'll discuss the length of that in a second. And then a small finesse hook. And then you just have a small little bait, often just hooked through the nose or something. You can Texas rig them as well if you want. But the hook is actually tied to the line, so it's not hanging down. It's actually completely horizontal on the line, ideally, with the hook point pointed up. Now, the way that's this effective is because you can alter the length of line you have between your presentation, the bait, and the contact to the bottom, your weight. If you know that you have suspending fish and they're feeding 6 inches off the bottom, they don't want to feed on the bottom, they're feeding 6 inches off the bottom. That can make a huge difference. Yeah. Now you know exactly where you are because you're feeling the contact of the bottom that you're fishing with that weight. But your lure, the bait, is now in the strike zone. So you're not trying to guess where it is. You can 100% know you are 4, 6 inches, 2 feet off the bottom. You know exactly where that bait is. And that is one of the reasons why it's very effective.
Yeah. And oftentimes, like if your lake has a lot of, muck or weeds on the bottom, it's a rig that helps your bait keep off the bottom. Mm-hmm. And again, be more in the fish's face or in an area where it can find it easier. And drop shot is so versatile. Like you can fish Great Lakes drop shot with 4-pound test and gin clear water for big smallmouth, or you can literally fish a bubba shot, which is like heavy cover flipping style drop shots. And they're great. Like they work so good for smallmouth and really good for largemouth. But smallmouth for me, you have to have a drop shot tied on. You can't not. Yeah, it's such a subtle way to present just a beautiful little morsel of delicious food to a bass. You can, a little worm, little paddle tail, whatever the heck you want on a drop shot, and it'll work. And it sounds like a complicated technique, but it's not.
No.
And it works good for ice fishing too.
And the thing is too, the biggest shortcoming that I had, and I know what you had when you first started using it, is overworking the bait.
Yes.
Like that. Yes. The best thing you can do is nothing.
We learned by buying an ice fishing camera that small movements from your rod create large movements on your bait. Yeah. And I think one of the main flaws that we had, and I think probably half of you that are listening, probably 98% of you, is you're probably overworking a drop shot. 100% you are. Yeah. You can literally, if you're in a boat and your boat's rocking and holding your rod, the bait's already twitching down there. If it's slightly wavy, the bait's twitching down there. You don't have to jerk your rod. If you're moving your rod tip like a foot, your bait's like flying up and down there like some crazy, little minnow on E. Like it doesn't have to look like, you just want it to slightly be hovering and twitching down there. That's literally the deal.
What I've done too is if I'm fishing it's often fished on a spinning rod. Yep. And so what you can do is you can kind of like tickle the line right above the reel, and just that little bit will even give some action.
And you can feel bites.
Just
like Jeremy Wade. You see him always like holding the line. Yeah.
That, or you can even like start tapping like the raw butt or higher up on the rod, you can just tap it like Morse code. That little bit of action is still imparting action. You don't have to, have any big movements like Jesse said.
100%.
And even if there's absolutely no movement, sometimes like dead sticking, a topwater that's not moving, they'll hit it. This little like fish that just dropped down in front of them and just stopped moving completely, that can elicit strikes too.
There's underwater currents as well, even subtle ones that are going to make this bait move. Yeah. So just to be, just to say, you don't have to learn Morse code, but just try to be subtle when you do it. And it's a great technique for bass, like we're mentioning, walleye, panfish, ice fishing. It's great. It's probably one of the most effective techniques that I would tell anyone that you should learn if you want to fish in Ontario.
And if you're branching out into finesse fishing, this is probably the one thing I would say to start with first. Yeah. Because it's getting you used to catching big fish on a small bait. Yeah. And it's
light line.
And light line. Yeah. But it's like you said, it's very easy to learn. It's not something that you have to, train for to be effective at. It's literally the less you do, the better with it almost. Yeah. So now I think we're done. At least our top picks. Like we said before, there's so many other things. There's, like crankbaits, there's jerkbaits. Jerkbaits are amazing smallmouth bait. Crankbaits 100%. Are fantastic. I love crankbait fishing. It didn't make my list, but I do love crankbait fishing.
And I'll tell you, it's probably because we fish a lot of weedy lakes.
Yeah.
But when you go up north and we're fishing some of these lakes, there's no weeds. You're like, wow, I can fish a crankbait and just reel it in, and there's no weeds on my hook. So it really depends where you live.
So don't. It's getting late. My brain is just gone. So if you're trying for bass fishing and you feel overwhelmed by the biggest fishing industry that's out there, with the most tournaments, the most professional anglers focusing on them, there's so much information about it. Yeah. But this is just a small sampling of what we have found that works really well for our area. Again, we're Ontario anglers. We fish a lot of the southern Ontario bodies of water. These things work everywhere because everything that we just talked about was primarily invented or made popular by American anglers down in the south.
Yeah.
So these things work absolutely everywhere. So if you want to try something new that you haven't tried before, maybe it's one of the things that Jesse and I recently got onto, or even years past we made the effort to try walking the dog and learn that. It wasn't difficult to learn, 100% worth it. It's one of my favorite forms of topwater fishing now is walking the dog. So 100%, if you're out there, if you haven't tried some of the things that we've talked about, or if there's something else that you have seen or heard about, try the Tokyo rig. We didn't talk about that. That's pretty new. It's a weird little rig. Try it. Yeah. It works. Basically, everything you throw in the water for these fish can work if you fish it effectively. Yeah. So don't feel overwhelmed by what's out there. Every year, Jesse and I like to try a new technique and try and learn it, and it just adds to our repertoire. So I encourage you all to do that as well.
For sure.
A couple things we wanted to mention as well, again, is the giveaway for True North Baits. I forgot to talk about that earlier. So it's another great giveaway. He's a pretty cool guy. I talked to him. I met him at Gagnon's actually before we went crappie fishing, and so he pointed to some of his recommendations, and boy did they work. So I'm really satisfied with what I purchased from them in the past.
He's either really good at telling us what baits to use, or maybe we're just decent anglers, or maybe both.
I think he knows what sells and is like, that one. Yeah. I'm constantly having to pour that one. So this giveaway, it's a multi-species package. So it has an assortment of soft plastics, variety of those. He's got the hooks, he's got a compact box, and he even has True North Baits t-shirt he's going to throw in there for you. So a nice little assortment pack for you. If again, if we're talking about Texas rigging or we're talking about drop shotting, there's 100%. I know he specializes in finesse soft plastics. So if you wanted to get into drop shotting, this is the perfect giveaway for you to try some of these more finesse presentations, because he's definitely going to have some awesome stuff in there for you.
Exactly. And how can you win this giveaway? Something that I tell people every week. You have to be following us on our Instagram account, Average Ontario Anglers. Right now, that is the only way to enter the giveaways. And here's how you do it. Follow us on Instagram, put on post notifications. Every week, towards the end of the week, Thursday or Friday, we actually post the giveaway. And
it'll be on the stories.
It'll be on the stories and in the main feed, and it'll tell you how to enter, and that's the only way to enter. So Make sure you follow us on Instagram if you're not already.
Mm-hmm.
As well, we'd like to mention, please leave us a review. If you're watching this on Spotify or Apple, please leave us a review. It means a lot. And if you're watching this on YouTube, give us a thumbs up.
And we also recently set up our Patreon. So if you are looking for a way to support us, right now on our Patreon, which Jesse will have linked below, it's something that, again, it's completely voluntary. If you like to, right now we have the $2 a month or a custom one. You can do a one-time donation if you like. It's basically like buying one of us a cup of coffee if you do the $2 a month. So if you have ever thought, man, those guys are fun, if I ever saw them at Tim Hortons, I would buy them a cup of coffee. That's $4. So you're actually getting a 50% savings. So we encourage, if you feel the need or have the desire to support us, that is a way that we just opened up that we'd love to get some support. Not mandatory by any means. We're going to continue giving these giveaways for all of our listeners right now, and also the content that we hope you're enjoying as well. So again, like Jesse said, follow, leave a rating. If you ever see us out and about,
buy us a coffee.
Buy us a coffee. Even just come over, say hi, ask for a pic. We're not that famous, but we'll do it.
Anyway, this is episode 15 of the Average Ontario Anglers podcast. Again, if you're a company or a brand that would like to pair up with us for one of our future giveaways, make sure to shoot us an email at averageontarioanglers@gmail.com. Mm-hmm. As well, you could also send us a direct message on Instagram or Facebook. So thanks again for everyone listening to this.
One last thing.
Oh, okay.
One last thing I wanted to mention about True North Baits is he's bringing out these spin bucktails.
Ooh.
Have you seen those?
Yeah, I did.
They look good.
Look
He just
really
had a killer trip on them, actually.
He was fishing the day that we recorded this today. He sent me a bunch of pics of walleye that he smashed on them.
Nailed them. So yeah, those are actually, and the last thing I want to mention, because check out his website for them. It's got an underspin blade on it. It's a bucktail jig.
Yeah.
It's hand tied, so that thing stays like locked on. Like he showed me the one. He sent Jesse a picture of the one that he's retiring now because he had a few trips on it. Lots of success with it. The thing's beat up. There's still hair on that. Yeah. I caught like 2 walleye on a bucktail jig, and all my hair fell off. Yeah. Kind of like the top of my head. But it also has a Gamakatsu hook. So again, it's going to be great hookup percentage, nice flash, a great bait that's going to last a while. So
great walleye bait. He's caught big pike on them as well. It's a bait that, it's one of those baits in Ontario that you're like, you kind of need one of these. Yeah. You know. So
make sure you check that out for him. If you ever do, like we mentioned before, if you ever look to order something from something you've heard about on the podcast, especially if it's a local bait maker, let them know that you heard it from AOA, and that way they know that what they're doing by giving stuff away is actually useful for them.
Yeah. Or they might be like, who?
That's probably the most regular response. But anyways, thanks for listening. Hope you all have a great week, and we'll see you next time.